characteristics that we find in the 20th and 21st century is the slow snail pace at which people, the church, declares sanctity. If you look back over the centuries, we have thousands upon thousands of saints that have been glorified in the original church in Orthodoxy. And yet when you look at these 2 centuries, the past one and the one to today, it sort of really trickles in. I guess to some extent that's the result of the diasporas and the various breakups that have occurred through various political means and others that have occurred in the world. As you know, our parish here is dedicated to St. Herman of Alaska, as well as the Mother of God, the Dormition. You can ask, well, why St. Herman of Alaska, who's over 10,000 kilometres away or something? What's that got to do with Australia? A lot. St. Herman was not a priest. He was a monk from the famous monastery of Valam in northern Russia, who came with several other monks with zeal to the American land, which we call the New Land, the New World. And there they went about evangelizing the local peoples, not the migrants that have inhabited that land, but the actual natives. And they were very successful, even though a few of them were martyred by some of the pagan priests. That was put to an end, and if you go to Alaska, for example, today, you will see Orthodox churches all over the place with their cupolas glowing in the sun, whenever the sun is out in Alaska, which is not that often, but nevertheless. One of the great saints, St. Herman, in the 20th century, although they knew about him, no one really wanted to stick their neck out to glorify him as a saint. And this bothered one person in particular. His name was Gleb Pomazhansky, young man who finished his schooling in the secular realm and then went to seminary in Jordanville, New York, to complete the theological course. And he was very zealous for the sort of work that St. Herman did, evangelizing others, which is the apostolic work. It's also the last commandment that Christ gave us when he ascended. He said to go out into the world and evangelize the others, teach them what I've taught you, baptize them, etc. And this Gleb, not really knowing exactly what to do, had some ideas. He gathered various materials, made slideshows and talks, and he started to travel around America giving talks in various parishes and various places. Quite good talks, actually, for a young man of his age, which was at that time probably in his 20s. He eventually made his way all the way up to Alaska, where St. Herman was buried. He was buried on an island, Spruce Island, which is not far away from Kodiak Island. And he came there and met the caretaker of that little sanctuary there, Father Gerasim, who had been there for many years as an ascetic in the forest, in the desert there, praying without ceasing and doing all those sorts of things that the early saints did when they ran out from the world to obtain Christ-likeness, or as we say, the acquisition of the Holy Spirit. And he met Father Gerasim and spoke with him. And by the way, some decades ago, the National Geographic magazine actually printed a coloured photo of Father Gerasim walking through the forest on Spruce Island. In any case, this Gleb was inspired but also dejected to some extent because he didn't quite know how to go about with this missionary work. How are we going to get St. Herman known to the American land and basically to all New World, which is also Australia and New Zealand and all those countries that have been populated mainly in the 19th century by people from Europe. He would go and pray at St. Herman's grave, which was a shallow grave at that time. And later on it was moved into a chapel there where his relics still remain to this day. And he stayed there quite a while, but nothing happened. He was reading a book by St. Seraphim of Sarov, a book that's very readily available. It's the Conversation by St. Seraphim with his great friend Montevilov. And in this book, Montevilov asks Father Seraphim basically the same question that Gleb has been asking. Why are we not seeing sanctity around us? Why are we not having all these saints that they used to have in the olden days? And St. Seraphim said, no, that's a simple answer. People don't have any resolve anymore. That's it, no resolve. So Father Gleb closed that book, ran out onto the grave of St. Herman, threw himself down and said, Father Herman, I'm going to make a resolve. And he said that he heard this voice quite clearly. In Russian it's mechtai, which means sort of dream. He said, well, I want to go and proclaim orthodoxy in the New World. And he heard the voice again saying, what else? He said, I want to glorify you. It's St. Herman. And then he said he heard the voice again. What else? He said, he was a bit stunned then. He said, send me a fool who will understand me. And he had in mind a wife. Because he was a lay person. He wasn't a priest or anything like that. Send me a fool that will understand me. And after that, everything stopped. He didn't hear anything at all. Anyway, Gleb returned back to San Francisco where he was, and very shortly after met his fool, which was not a lady at all, but it was Father Seraphim Rose, the future Father Seraphim Rose, Eugene Rose. The two of them started a missionary bookshop in English next door to the cathedral in San Francisco, big Russian cathedral, the largest Russian cathedral outside of Russia at that time, which was very successful, but at the same time very pressing against them because of the world. And all this time they were under the care of Archbishop John, the Holy One, Maximovich. They wanted to flee from this worldly pressure and to go somewhere quieter where they could do this work. It took quite a while, but eventually they found a place in Northern California, about 5 hours drive from San Francisco, which was at a hill just near the township of Platina. And there they, in very primitive conditions, no electricity, no running water, none of those facilities, no general stores or anything, settled down to live a sort of a monastic life, although they were not monastics, nor were they ordained. But they brought all their printing presses by U-Haul trucks and whatever, a big difficult job, set it up and started to continue to print the journal that was going around the whole world in English then called Orthodox Word. Maybe you don't understand this, but up until about the late 1960s and early 70s, there was really nothing in English about orthodoxy. And what there was pretty pathetic, pretty weak. And it was mainly through their work, Gleb and Eugene, that the Orthodox English world started to get much important ascetic and Orthodox literature about how to live the Orthodox life. People started to come there on pilgrimages and talk to them. And the bishop at that time said, you can't go on like this. I have to ordain you. Although they didn't want to be ordained, but they accepted that. And Gleb became Father Herman, and Eugene became Father Seraphim. And more people came there. They, of course, wanted to go to Alaska to establish monastery there. But Father Seraphim was quite ill and couldn't travel much more, so they sort of hung around there for a while. In any case, it was through their work that they eventually pushed through the whole sort of collateral of getting St. Herman glorified. Glorified as, well, he's probably what considered as the proto evangelizer of the American land. There are others as well that came with him from Valam and started to evangelize the native peoples there, mainly the Aleutian peoples. And for this reason, it set the sort of the tone of how these sort of things should be done. It's not from the initiative of a bishop or some authority like that, church committee, but from individuals like that we get our saints. And that's the way it's always been in the past. The same thing happened with Archbishop John. There was quite a lot of resistance against him being glorified, mostly out of envy. They even put him on trial in a secular court. It was a terrible thing for a person who he didn't even sleep, he just sat in a chair when he needed to rest, and was an incredible wonder worker, miracle worker, of which you can read about in numerous books that are printed about him. So this is the reason why we have St. Herman as one of the protectors of this chapel, this mission, because he was one of the first to go into this new world and evangelize the people there, not by force like the Roman Catholics did when they came into the lands and sort of forced natives and whatever, martyring them, killing them even, if they didn't accept their ideas. But by prayer, by fasting, by instruction, by showing them the true love that the church brings to others, they were able to win over the people. That's sort of the very quick history of the way things work. Both Father Herman and Father Seraphim, of course, repose now, and we await official glorification of them. We know that Father Seraphim has been glorified by Bishop Nectari when he was being buried, so there's no reason why you can't call him Saint Blessed Father Seraphim. There's no reason why you can't. The other thing that I wanted to say to you is this. The Father Gerasim that was looking after St. Herman's relics, being very much alone there, was protected from all the politics of the church that was going on. As you know, Russia was under communism, and there were all sorts of persecutions against Christians. There was the catacomb church, which was trying to survive. Then there were groups that broke away and started all sorts of factions. Not that they were necessarily dogmatically wrong, we can't say that, and we can't say that they'd never had apostolic succession, but they were fighting mainly for territory and recognition, which is very wrong all the way through. Father Gerasim missed out on all of that, luckily, and showed us an example of how to step away from those sorts of things that occur. Because when I look at what happens in Orthodoxy today, there is so much rubbish going on about this jurisdiction and that jurisdiction and this bishop and that bishop and whatever. Unless somebody is actually preaching heresy and going against the teaching of the church, you cannot really put them down. You've got to be careful about that. Because most of them, and this includes many priests as well, are trying to gain fame with the world. Those who are young to Orthodoxy and read a lot about sanctity and how spiritual fathers, holy God-bearing fathers help in life, start to want to look for these sort of holy people, but they are not available that easily. And what you normally trip over are gurus, ambitious, ordained people who want to gain a flock for themselves, gain a following for themselves, and who wish to control them, thinking that they know better and they know how to handle people's lives. Very, very dangerous situation. And there are so many of those in the world, particularly today. The true holy ones don't behave like that at all. In fact, they push people away. Holy, God-bearing fathers and mothers basically push people away. And if you ever do get to see them and talk to them, you'll come out floating on air. No matter what sort of sinner you may have been, they will not put you down, but they will lift you up and put you on a right path in 1 or 2 words. That's all that's needed. You know, you read about confession, and you come here to confess. This is more like a brush up, because true confession, according to the Orthodox Church, is revelation of thoughts. And how are you going to have that? It normally occurs in a good monastery where after or around the compline service in the evening before bed, the monastics will line up to the abbot and confess their thoughts. That's a big difference to confessing so-called sins that you think you might have done. You know, you come to the abbot, you bow down before him, kiss his hand, you say, and he says, well, what sort of things have happened today? I had a thought that you're a terrible, terrible abbot. You know, and he's listening to this. What else? That cook, he has got no idea how to cook lunch. That was a terrible, over-salted lunch. I can't stand it. What else? When I was digging in the garden, I couldn't get away from all the decadent and fleshly thoughts that I had. What else? Well, at the last service, I was thinking about eggs for breakfast. What else? You know, and he goes on and on like that. He's revealing thoughts, right? At the same time, he's revealing what's really inside him spiritually. And the spiritual father sees this. He might give him a word or two and say, right, do this or this. He blesses him, reads the prayers of absolution and reconciliation. And the person walks away like he's floating on air. That's the result of being in contact with holiness. We have had that. We have had contact with holy people which give that sort of result. 1 or 2 words, they'll listen to you, and it's exactly what you need for your soul. Not these big time sort of litanies about this or that, and going into depth about all this theology and how you're going to handle it and all this and all that. It doesn't work like that. As the Holy Fathers say, where there are many words, there's a demon. Where there are few words, that's what God is. And that's what you have to be careful of. These gurus which hang around all over the place, particularly in the West, where we have many people coming into the church from outside at an older age, and they have not got the feel or the understanding about orthodoxy. They read things from exalted spiritual texts and think that they can just apply that just like that in their lives. Well, they can't. They can't. Because you have to grow in that. And you have to grow by realizing your own backwardness and your own fall, your own fallen nature and how bad it is. And even when you come out of a confession, you don't consider yourself pure because you're not pure. You've still got the fallen nature within you. Purity requires that to be taken away, which is for the next life. All you have to do is to come out realizing how unworthy you are and how backward you are from that which is required of us to attain that Christ-likeness, that transfiguration in our life. The saints reach a point of that, but it's never complete because it goes on for eternity in the heavenly realm. We only begin here. Our duty here is to be enough to get into that heavenly realm so we can continue with that process. And the reason is because Christ is infinite, so that process is infinite. That's the great thing about it. Those people who think, I confess and I do this and I'm pure, sinless, poppycock, excuse the expression. Nothing like that. They are full of so many sins they don't even see. And if they saw them, they'd die, drop down dead on the spot because of the horrors of what you see in your soul, really. But we have this faith in our orthodoxy about how to go about that. And this idea of humility and being able to understand your shortcomings in virtually everything is so important for spiritual progress. In fact, the more you see your sinfulness, the more you have progressed spiritually. Always remember that in your life. The reading today, which we often talk about the person who was beaten up by bandits and left to die, being ignored by the priest and the Levite, was Christ's example of who our neighbours are. In other words, neighbours who are not part of our Christian group as such, someone who we don't know. They might even be atheists, they might even be anti-Christian, but we are supposed to treat them at arm's length, not to bring them into our own fold, but at arm's length like this person did, taking him to an inn and helping them through life, and that may be changing them. Christ also gave the example of who our brothers and sisters are, and our mothers and fathers, at the Sermon on the Mount, I think it was, when he said, look at all these people. These are the brothers, sisters, mothers and fathers, because they are the ones that have come into the future church, like you and I, and all of us here, are of that species, if you like. Brothers, fathers, sisters, mothers. But there is another group who we call friends. Friends who are the very highest, whom we call some of the apostles and some of the saints, who are on that level where they really understand God's will, the saints. They are called friends to Christ. So you have those three groups, the friends, the brothers, sisters, mothers and fathers, and the neighbours who are not in the church. Have that as your understanding and be very careful, because as I always say to you, you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. You cannot rely on gurus and all these sorts of things. You have to get yourself into a situation where no matter what happens, you can't just sort of run out to somebody and confess yourself. You've got to be able to be strengthened to stay spiritually sober and not to fall into despondency or despair. That's not an easy task today, given all the things that are happening to us. But it can be done, because we are never tempted beyond what is required of us in our life. Remember that. Be careful. You have all the talents, you have all the resources that you need that's given to you through the church to walk that way. Make sure you walk it, and pray to those saints who are the closest to you that that indeed comes to pass, and that you will be able to obtain that heavenly realm that we seek. Amen.